Good afternoon. This is John Johnson. I'm glad to have you joining us today for CornCon VI, Return of the Cyber Jedi. Our next speaker is coming up, Adam Kanjawa, who's a director at Malwarebytes Labs. And he's going to be speaking about enduring from home, COVID-19's impact on business security. And he's going to start here in about 2 minutes. I want to make some introductions here. First off, if you're not participating in our contests, we have some contests running. We have a lot of information both on our website and on our Discord channel. If you'd like to get to our Discord server, the link is on our homepage, corncon.net. So please visit there. That's where you can get the links for tomorrow's talks. You can get our Discord information. You can find out about our contests. And so we have a couple contests. Our first contest we have is a CTF with an embedded crypto challenge. So we have a lot of great questions. It's a CTF that's running today and tomorrow. We're going to have tournament winners announced at 4:15 tomorrow after our final closing keynote. And so I just want to mention that the CTF Try Hack Me group that's putting on our CTF is giving away 2 30-day Try Hack Me VPN coupon codes, and we are going to email them to the winners. And so we've looked at our audience and our random selection for our lunch audience. Peer, we are going to be getting in touch with you. You're the winner of the 30-day CTF code for Friday. Let's see. The other thing we have Get Shifted is the company that is sponsoring our security card game Insight tournament. We have a card tournament. It's really cool, and I just want to encourage you to play because listen to this. They're giving away at 4:15 tomorrow a Nintendo Switch to the all tournament winner. So you'll definitely want to tune in tomorrow, play the game, and see if you can win this. That's a real awesome prize. So without any further ado, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Adam Kujawa. He's director of Malwarebytes Labs. And I want to thank Malwarebytes. I've known their CEO for a number of years, and Malwarebytes, since the beginning, has been a real supporter of CornCon, and we just want to thank you. So let Adam take over here. Adam?
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're going to be talking about a report that Malwarebytes completed really recently. And the report is about the enduring from home, basically what happened to businesses when they suddenly had to switch from a in-person office type model of working to almost entirely remote. So we're going to talk about that a little bit and the results that we got from a survey asking a lot of these folks how they did. So as mentioned, my name is Adam Kujawa, and I am one of the directors in Malwarebytes Labs at Malwarebytes. So let's just go ahead and jump into it. We got a lot of information to cover. So in March, for companies across the United States, business as usual became business uncharted as the novel coronavirus spread throughout the nation at an unchecked pace. Faced with shelter-in-place orders in their home countries and states, countless companies transitioned to entirely remote workforces. Predictably, these near immediate transitions carried with them some setbacks. A remote workforce can become a workforce stretched thin. Communication must adapt to online models of email, chat messaging, and video conferencing. Collaboration must move to cloud-based storage platforms, and keeping businesses afloat must take into account the unique cybersecurity needs for now remote workers who are connecting to potentially unsecured home networks while accessing company resources from personal devices, all without the direct support found from within the office. So at Malwarebytes, we wanted to dig deeper into today's new work from home normal, measuring not just the immediate reaction to the pandemic, but also businesses' planned cybersecurity strategy for the future. The results from our study exposed a concerning theme, and that is security hubris, and we'll talk about that a little later. real quick. I need to fix something. There we go. All right, so let's talk about the methodology here. Why did we do this? How do we do this more specifically? So we surveyed more than 200 managers, directors, and C-suite executives in IT and cybersecurity roles at companies across the US. These roles included IT manager, IT director, and IT executives. Our respondents covered the gamut of company sizes, with some working in small and medium-sized businesses and others at large enterprise organizations. We grouped participants into the company sizes you see on the right side there, and our survey of roughly 12 questions tracked respondents' concerns about transitioning to work from home, the impact suffered due to the pandemic, and their plans to implement long-term security changes moving ahead. So enough about that. Let's get to the takeaways. What did people say? So our survey found that a majority of respondents scored their organizations rather high when evaluating their readiness to transition to work from home. This may be an example of an often difficult to measure phenomenon that we like to call security hubris, which is also the overconfidence in limited security measures deployed. A good example of this would be that 73% of respondents scored their organizations a 7 out of 10 or higher when determining their readiness for transitioning to work from home. And at the same time, 44% of respondents' organizations did not provide cybersecurity training that focused on potential threats of working from home, like ensuring that home networks had strong passwords or devices were not left in the reach of non-authorized users. And in addition to that, 45% of respondents' organizations did not perform security and online privacy analysis of software tools deemed necessary in transition to work from home. So a lot of these folks just started using software because they thought they should. And 61% of respondents' organizations provided work-issued devices to employees as needed, which is great. However, 65% did not deploy new antivirus solutions for those same devices. So here's a work laptop. We didn't put anything on it. Good luck. Finally, 61% of respondents' organizations did not urge employees to use antivirus on their personal devices. And we'll talk more about personal device use that we did kind of delve into in the survey in a little bit. So while some of these numbers may present the picture of an insecure, vulnerable workforce, there's actually a flip side to the data. For example, while nearly half of our respondents may not have provided cybersecurity training to their employees, the other half did. The same is true for the 55% of respondents that perform security and online privacy analysis of software tools. So to understand the volume of work IT teams would need to tackle in the transition to work from home, we asked survey participants to tell us the percentage of employees that were moved to a work from home model. About 1/3 of respondents, about 33.2%, moved 81 to 100%, if not all, of their employees home. And 142 respondents, or a little more than 70%, moved 61% or more of the workforce to a work from home model. So a majority of companies with less than 700 employees, which is about 84.1%, moved more than half of their workforce, but not all, to work from home. And on the other hand, companies with at least 700 employees opted to moving almost their entire workforce home. It's a lot of numbers. So the shift from working in the office to working from home did not erase cybersecurity problems that were already there pre-COVID. If anything, organizations were presented with new compounding challenges that had to be addressed without delay. Companies that were able to successfully transition to work from home ran into problems. More than half of IT leaders surveyed reported facing at least 3 different challenges listed on our questionnaire. So the challenges that were cited by most respondents was training employees on how to be security compliant at home. And over 55% of people said they're worried about that. Followed by setting up work or personal devices with necessary software. 51% of participants felt shifting to a new remote model of communication was a challenge as well. And the challenge selected by the fewest respondents was ensuring work-life balance at only 36%. And I think after 7 or 9 months of us all working from home, I kind of wish we all had a little more attention on our work-life balance, right? So when asked about their biggest cybersecurity concerns, now that all or a portion of their employees are working remotely, it's clear that managers, directors, and executives are most concerned about other individuals in the home who have access to an employee's device and might inadvertently compromise it. Other concerns that stand out are difficulties associated with managing devices using remote work resources, the possibility of IT not being able to support employees efficiently, the general lack of adequate cybersecurity measures over resources, including cloud collaboration tools, and the use of personal networks and devices. So, to measure participants' confidence in their work from home readiness, we asked managers, directors, and executives across all the business sizes, US regions, and industries to rate how prepared their organization was to go from in office to working from home. And on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 representing the least prepared and 10 representing the most. Of the 200 respondents, the average ranking was about 7.23. In fact, roughly 3/4 of those we surveyed gave the organization score of 7 or above on the preparedness for the transition to work from home. On the flip side, only 14% scored the company a 4 out of 10 or less. So, despite finding training employees on security compliance to be a challenge, 47% of respondents were confident that their employees were very aware of the cybersecurity best practices they needed to follow at home. A much smaller portion believed their employees were acutely aware and mindful to avoid risk, and only 5.4% of IT leaders said their employees were oblivious and risky. People have a lot of confidence. Well, some people do. Um, Respondents in directors and executive positions expressed more confidence than managers in their employees' awareness of cybersecurity procedures. While 20.5% of executives said their staff was acutely aware, just 16.2% of managers felt the same way. Conversely, only 1.7% of directors stated their employees were oblivious and risky, compared to 7.6% of managers. So, do the managers just see the real picture and know the actual threat that's out there, or are they just more cynical than directors and executives? So, naturally, after transitioning to a remote workforce, 57% of respondents said their usage of remote tools such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Google Hangouts to communicate across the organizations had increased significantly. So, we found similar boosts for instant communication and messaging tools like Slack, cloud storage solutions to manage data securely, and VPN services to keep communications locked down. There were also gains for password managers, with 30.2% claiming they use them more, or rather, slightly more than they used to, and 19.8% using them significantly more. And so, while these numbers overall just kind of sound low, it's worth noting that any increase in key areas of business security is a good thing, even in cases where businesses said their use had slightly increased. So, for example, 37.1% of respondents confirmed a small rise for VPN usage, with 40.6% replying in kind for tools such as Slack. And for some tools and services, there wasn't much difference between how respondents were using them after lockdown versus before. In fact, both cloud storage and cloud access were used with the same frequency with no visible increase. Identity management, even such as like OneLogin or Okta, was particularly unique in that precisely 36.1% they said they use these tools the same as before, while another 36.1% said they use them a little bit more than they did pre-pandemic. So all this data suggests that work environments that were already secure and making good use of security and privacy tools had a reasonably smooth transition to working from home, even if the organization wasn't previously aware that it was possible to do that. So more successful and well thought out security policies and practices didn't ultimately need a huge amount of change to become COVID-19 resilient. And a good example of this, just to kind of toot our own horn, was Malwarebytes. I've been with Malwarebytes for over 8 years, and in the industry for over 16. And for the majority of my time at Malwarebytes, I've worked remote. A lot of our research organizations are remote. We got a lot of sales people that are remote, support people that are remote, to cover the different time zones out there, the different areas and things like that. So from the get-go, we've been kind of learning how to do this remote thing correctly. We've learned what the best communication tools were. We learned what the best, way to stay in contact with people was. And overall, I think when the pandemic hit and we all had to work from home suddenly, I mean, those that weren't already doing it, we've got about 4 different offices worldwide and a total of like 900 employees for the entire company. And so we still had a lot of people that had to switch from in the office to working from home. But luckily, we had all these tools set up. We had this framework in place because of our existing remote workers, and that made the transition really easy for us. At the same time, even if you consider, and I'll talk about this later, but even if you consider the value of making sure that an employee who is remote, like at a conference or at a training or somewhere else that they can't be in the office, you want to make their ability to access your resources, very secure and not just a potential vulnerability for attackers to take advantage of. So there's lots of benefits to doing that. So our survey found that 23.8% of the respondents ran into unexpected expenses, and specifically to address a cybersecurity breach or malware attack. Nearly 20% stated they face a security breach because of a remote worker. So let's briefly put that statistic into perspective. Remember that all it takes for a company to suffer a security breach as a result of a remote workforce is to compromise just one remote employee. As our survey showed, a remarkable 98% of respondents said their organizations have moved at least 21% of their employees into remote positions. Further, the remaining 2% of respondents said the organizations moved anywhere from 0 to 20% of their workforces into remote positions. So with these numbers, it's safe to assume that nearly every company out there today has at least one remote employee and thus is vulnerable to this type of threat. I told you we were going to talk about personal devices. So 31% of our respondents admitted that they sometimes used personal devices for work, and a frightening 27.7% said they use their personal devices more than the devices issued to them by their employer. Worse, 8.4% never even received a work issue device for remote usage. So because of all that, only 39.1% told us that they adhere to a strict regime of only using worker issued devices for their workload. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of you out there right now are probably dealing with as well, where you might have a work issued laptop, or they say, this is how you log into our VPN, or this is how you access your corporate email. This is how you get into the cloud storage. And if these processes of accessing this information, working with the information aren't fine-tuned well enough to at least make it, not seem too different from your office environment experience, then you can get work done. But unfortunately, a lot of times we see folks, not able to do that because of technical difficulties. They might not have an IT staff that's readily available or able to help them with home IT issues. Like for another example from Malwarebytes, the other day, it was a few weeks back, I had an issue with my laptop, my work issued laptop, where suddenly it just would not connect to the Wi-Fi. And I know there was an issue that went around. Some people have mentioned it. I just could not connect to my home Wi-Fi. My personal devices connected fine. Everything else in my house connected fine, but the work laptop just wouldn't do it. And so I reached out to IT. Luckily, we have a help desk system, already set up. We utilize, single sign-on for authentication capabilities and whatnot. And I was lucky that our IT staff said, hey, I already know about this problem. We wrote some scripts. We had some batch files here. Let me send them to you. Did that, reset, various aspects of the network configuration, and the thing worked again. So fantastic. I'm very lucky that worked out for me. But let's say that it hadn't. Let's say that I couldn't reach my IT staff. Let's say that the ticket that I submitted just sat in the queue forever because it was a low priority or something. Or maybe our IT folks were dealing with something far worse, something far more serious. In which case, I couldn't connect to the internet with my work laptop. So how am I supposed to do my work without using my work laptop? My only choice would be to either not do work at all, which I don't think anybody wants, or use my own personal device, which is, probably less secure. So what are my choices here? And this is the kind of stuff that people have to worry about and plan for. So as we know, the effects of working from home and the coronavirus pandemic extend beyond cybersecurity impacts. Companies have also suffered broad financial losses. Over half of the respondents said that they froze all hiring or only made a few exceptions for critical positions. This makes sense with with the short-term future of an organization in limbo. You do not want to make long-term commitments, except when the position is critical to your organization's needs. So 48% restricted travel expenses, which was not hard to do with the international travel ban. And so that, made it easy. Over a third of our respondents held off promotions and pay raises, which is a logical consequence of short-term insecurity. If the company comes out of the crisis unhurt, it's easy enough to make raises retroactively effective. And 30.7% stated that they had to let people go, which is an unfortunate consequence of lost business, and almost a quarter of respondents lost clients and contracts. So these numbers show that for the rest of 2020, several companies may be operating in a crouched, careful position with fewer resources and fewer dollars to rely on. While that data may imply that actual workforces powering these companies will similarly suffer, the data, strangely, shows the opposite. So let's talk about security hubris. Any data, particularly data that points to conflicting conclusions, demands scrutiny. And that's just what we did when looking at some of the more contradictory results in our survey. As we stated earlier, 73% of respondents scored their organization a 7 out of 10 or higher when evaluating their readiness to transition to work from home. This was a promising result, as it showed confidence on the part of the IT managers, directors, and executives to maintain the productivity, performance, and security of their employees. But in looking at how respondents specifically evaluated their security posture during the work from home aspect, we must consider a hidden modifier, and that is security hubris. The fact remains that transitioning to a work from home model in the way many organizations were forced to do, immediately, with more devices, more software deployments, and limited in-person support, has already created opportunities for more attacks. So security hubris makes us believe that since we are secured in one way, then we're secured in all ways. For example, who cares about passwords when you're careful about what you post on Facebook? And that's a terrible, terrible example. But basically, blind faith is anything is dangerous, even if the tools that you put your faith into keep you secure have drawbacks. So take, for example, a network admin who deploys network security tools to keep attackers from breaching the network through outward connected servers, assuming that their new security control is good enough to keep the whole network safe, but failing to protect individual endpoints that criminals may use to attack via spear phishing. It's that over-reliance in that one aspect of security, assuming, hey, since I'm so strongly protected in this one area, I don't need to worry as much about the rest. Unfortunately, that's what the bad guys expect us to do. And that's why they often look for alternate methods of gaining access into networks through methods that maybe we had never considered before. So despite this truth, we asked respondents, how has your organization's level of security changed in the transition to working from home? We learned that many managers, directors, and executives responded as though nothing had changed. Our top response was, we're equally secure as we were in the office. However, it's more likely that home network configurations are less secure than the connection they would be using in the office. We've seen cybersecurity attacks that rely specifically on this type of human error. The Mirai botnet had repeatedly scanned cyberspace for Internet of Things devices that are still operating with default login credentials that came out of the box, using those credentials to take control of the device and trigger DDoS attacks. And yes, I said cyberspace. I love the word cyberspace. We cannot assume that every remote employee has changed the default password on their home router, yet the responses showed that organizations are equally secure, and so they basically assume the opposite. The second most common response was, we're slightly less secure than we were in the office, coming at 26.7%. This answer is likely the most accurate when applied broadly to the post-COVID work environment. Simply put, Employees likely aren't as secure as they were in an office because they don't have a dedicated security team to lock down their home routers or smart devices. These unsecured assets offer an avenue of entry into home and work networks and allow for possible hijacking of company systems or resources. So next, if we combine the responses that favored at-home security over that in the office, we see that more than 35% of survey participants are potentially overconfident. We're significantly more secure than we were in the office, received 18.3%, and we're slightly more secure than we were in the office, garnered 16.8%. So we have to consider a separate possibility here that perhaps office networks were woefully undersecured to begin with, and efforts made to improve the baseline when moving to work from home, efforts were made. However, if that wasn't the case, this could be another indicator of more security hubris. So let's say that your IT guy, can't get the funding to properly roll out security for the work network in the office or whatever, but they, spend their own money on security for their home network. So in that case, yeah, I guess they probably are more secure. But that's a reach. So perhaps IT leaders believe that security, that because they are physically distant from the networks or offices, their security is no longer centralized. And that means it's less likely for attackers to target them. Or perhaps they feel more secure because they are in control of their own security, like I said, versus trusting someone else. These are assumptions we could all make, and we don't blame anyone for coming to those conclusions. But whether it be a VPN connection onto the corporate network, corporate email accounts, or access to cloud-based services, most employees need to access their company's resources remotely. If an attacker is able to identify key information about a target, such as email address or social media account, they may have an easier time infiltrating a personal network than a corporate one. That individual compromise can then be used as a springboard to greater corporate access. And in fact, a lot of the threats we saw over the first half of the year were remote access Trojans, information stealers, stuff meant to kind of scope out what applications people were using, how their connections to their business, resources were, things like that, to help identify possible avenues for infection using those remote employees. So the final response, the one that received the fewest votes, was we're significantly less secure than we were in the office, which came down at 6.9%, despite its low ranking. We believe this should be the expectation. This should be the expectation when companies initially move to a remote workforce. Security will likely be subpar in comparison to what it was in an office setting. If IT leaders work from that assumption, they'll likely avoid making mistakes or ignoring issues that could leave their organizations vulnerable. So most businesses will experience a drop in their ability to protect systems in the initial rollout to a fully remote workforce. Once new systems and tools have been established, configured, and deployed correctly, users will be as secure or maybe even more secure than when they were working in the office. But that's really a finish line that a lot of organizations may never see. So let's talk about next steps. So we asked our respondents, what kind of long-term changes will the recent transition to working from home have on your organization? And we were able to determine the top efforts being made to empower employees and optimize work from home security. The most popular response was to develop stronger remote security policies. We agree with respondents here, and as stronger remote security policies are important for not only long-term security strategy, but also unified execution across the organizations moving forward. The goal is to deploy remote work security guidance that views the organization from an attacker standpoint, so make sure you are creative. A close second at 54% was to install a permanent work from home model for employees who don't need to be in the office every day. I think I read yesterday that said that Twitter is just going to go work from home forever. Like their employees have that option forever. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But this response makes it possible to accommodate not only permanent work from home strategies, but also security that benefits workers. And as I mentioned before, these workers who might be out of the office on a business trip or vacation, they need to access company resources. So you're going to need the stuff anyway. Mirroring IT leaders' concerns that their employees needed more security training, 48.9% of respondents wanted to, quote, host more trainings for work from home. Training is important for remote employees. However, it can only be valuable if it's tailored to the individual or team or department needs and responsibilities. Like I said, I've been working remote for a very, very long time, and I've seen policies rolled out that seem to make sense to people in the office, but doesn't really make sense to people who are working remote, or it might only make sense to half of the people working remote. A blanket security policy and generic security training will only take organizations so far. Plus, workers are apt to pay better attention if security advice is specific and relevant. And what I mean by that is basically if you've got an IT team that can take the time to work with individual employees and say, okay, what's your home setup here? What kind of, have you changed the default passwords on your router? Are you, running the latest versions of whatever? Do you have any clear and obvious vulnerabilities? I think these things that can really only be a 5 or 10 minute assessment for most folks would benefit a lot of people immensely, because they don't feel like, all right, I'm supposed to, comply with this guidance that maybe half of it isn't relevant to what I'm doing, and that's an issue. So in an effort to see how well IT teams are testing new work from home technologies, we asked respondents if they plan on developing online privacy reviews for new software. 44.6% replied, yeah. An IT or security team that's deploying work from home tools needs to make sure that those tools both function and keep communication information secure. Sometimes new features are added to these tools that might change how they are configured. So conducting regular privacy and security audits on these technologies keep companies and employees safer. And finally, at 39.6% of surveyed participants said that they would deploy antivirus solutions that can better handle a remote workforce. So many of the threats that we have seen targeting work from home employees over the first couple quarters of 2020 are older commercial threats. This means that using an antivirus solution on users' home and remote work systems is probably one of the best things and easiest ways to secure these systems against types of threats that we're currently seeing in the wild. It's important, though, to keep in mind that the solution you decide to use should be easy to deploy, run updates, run scans, and monitor detections from anywhere your employees might be located, something that is more important now than ever before. So the last bit of security guidance we want to provide will not only protect users from real-world cyber threats in the wild, but also maintain productivity. First, of course, deploy security tools. I already kind of mentioned this previously. Try to find a solution that also works with mobile. We're seeing more and more cyber criminals and cybercrime groups attempting to compromise devices, mobile devices, Android, iOS, whatever, mainly to help defeat multi-factor authentication, which is something that we heavily push on people, is a good idea. So next, utilizing a VPN is a bit of a no-brainer. If your employees need to access secure data located on a local protected network, rather than making valuable data available to the world, utilizing VPNs with multi-factor authentication is a much better solution. Be sure to keep in mind ease of use when it comes to which VPN solution you choose to employ. If a user has too much difficulty logging into the VPN, that can result in multiple unfortunate outcomes. Like I mentioned before, if the technology you provide your employees doesn't work to help them do their work, then they're going to find something else to use. They're going to find some other way to do it. The first example that I mentioned before, talking about, there was an error with the computer, with a laptop, and then I got IT to fix it. But this example talks about how even if the process for connecting to your VPN is too convoluted and difficult for maybe a non-technical employee, they may also say, I'm not going to use that at all. It's too confusing for me. And VPN connections can be very confusing, especially when you've got things like, domain passwords to worry about, multi-factor authentication things to worry about. There's lots of stuff like that. But, there are lots of options out there, and I'm sure every person can find a VPN solution that fits their organization best. So here's an example. An employee just started working remote and needs to access some data from a corporate database. They were informed that they need to use a VPN to access that kind of data. However, the process of installing, configuring, logging in, etc., it becomes too much for the employee to handle. They end up spending a lot of time trying to use the software without success. In this instance, the employee is using productivity because of technical difficulties. Your IT teams will need to address this problem and walk the user through configuring the VPN, which could take them away from other tasks. And considering that a large chunk of the employee base is working remote, the IT staff probably have more tickets than they know what to do with. So the final outcome would be that the employee ends up not using their work issue device to connect to the database, or they would find some less secure workaround. Regardless, it degrades the organization's security posture. So point is, try to keep it simple. And finally, communication is key to not only keeping employees aware of policies and reporting potential threats, but also to maintain productivity, morale, and create a framework of support for your remote employees. In a regular office, an employee may be given a task, and if some details of the task isn't clear, or the employee just needs more info, it's easy enough to reach out to a fellow employee nearby, or their boss, or whomever. But when working remote, especially if an employee has been working remote for a while, reaching out to the boss or fellow employees isn't as easy as it once was for a number of reasons. So maintaining not just the technology, but a culture of communication for your remote folks should always be a high priority. So let's wrap this up, folks. Frustratingly, some of the very decisions that companies have made to better support their employees, to provide more software tools, to provide more devices, are the same types of decisions that can lead to a broader attack surface. Further, with the majority of workforces now working remotely, it is once again only human that some employers will begin to use their personal devices more and more frequently in completing their work. Despite the conditions many companies have created, which threat actors are now trying to take advantage of, these decisions were largely made to support the safety and security of employees. In the coming months, several forward-thinking decisions can help organizations fully realize their goal of a remote workforce that is equally as secure or even more secure than the previous office environment. So for the security of your business and your employees, you should consider deploying an antivirus solution that can manage now dispersed endpoints in your workforce. Many popular forms of malware today also happen to be older. These are known recorded threats, and a strong cybersecurity solution should be more than able to detect and remove these threats, or better yet, protect against and defend your business before they have a chance to take hold. As far as more modern threats go, we are seeing a resurgence in things like Emotet. We're seeing new developments and evolutions of families like TrickBot. There's been a lot of manual ransomware attacks recently. So the landscape is changing right now drastically. And we're not even entirely sure what it's going to look like at the end of the year. So, keep that in mind and make sure to roll out technology or solutions that have that kind of flexibility. Finally, our survey also revealed that nearly half of all respondents are considering various cybersecurity measures in the coming months, whether that includes developing stronger remote security or installing a permanent work from home model. We're more than halfway through the year now, and it's time that the other half of companies rise up. The tools are out there, and they are smart. There are smart and secure ways to do this, so let's go ahead and do it. That's it from me, folks. If you have any questions, please put them in there. Otherwise, thank you so much.
Thanks, Adam. We have any questions? Checking out the Q&A here. Don't see any right now. We do have a Discord channel. Channel 1, track 1 is over in our Discord server. The information to get to our Discord server is on our homepage, corncon.net. All right. Well, I don't see any questions at this time, so I'll just thank you again, Adam. It's really great to have you here, and it's really great to have Malwarebytes as a sponsor.
Thank you, John. Thanks for having me. This has been great. You guys have a good CornCon.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. Bye.